And so, how ingrained are these cartels with politicians, political parties, and even states? Like, obviously, the Sinaloa cartel, notorious Sinaloa, that's there. You know, when you go to a lot of the cities, Culiacan's one of the ones like very highlighted for El Chapo. It's the people there almost defend them as if they are, you know, not only their own, but they have I don't even know the word for it, but they're looked at in a lot of ways as, you know, angelic figures, and in very interesting ways, in ways people I don't think would even expect. How ingrained are these cartels with politicians? Is it kind of overplayed in terms of how corrupt it actually is? Because you hear rumors that it goes all the way to the top, or is it truly that corrupt? Is there political parties, states, whatever it might be, that are quote unquote
Yeah, so you kind of brought two issues. So the first issue about political corruption, it's as bad as they say. It is. Sometimes I think over my reporting over the years, I was initially naive. It's hard to gauge, you know, because I interview these guys, and you know, I've interviewed um, the Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderon, Mexican presidents. I've interviewed, you know, this high-ranking head of the entire country's police force. Interviewed generals and down to low, and you know, and you're with them, and they look convincing. And they're like, wow, maybe this guy's honest after all. They're not as bad as they say. And then you kind of see there's this court case which happened in January this year, and this ex head of police who I'd interviewed many years ago was convicted of drug trafficking, and the stories were crazy. I mean, one of the craziest stories I think or a couple of crazy stories of his corruption, which perhaps you can call state capture or capture of elements of the state by criminal, you know, organized crime. One of the craziest stories was this guy who described how there was the biggest ever cocaine seizure in the world in 2007. Covered this back in the day. 23 tons of cocaine. They burned it on a bonfire. Big New York Times story about it. They burned it on a bonfire. You know, have brass bands playing and military saluting. 23 tons of cocaine. Now worth billions of dollars on the street. This guy in the court said, no, they didn't really burn the cocaine. This guy helped us get the cocaine back. And we changed it for false cocaine. We like knocked up some false cocaine. Cocaine comes in kilo bricks. So we knocked up some false cocaine. Got some flour with sugar and shit, and just made this, you know, fake cocaine, and that's what they burned. So simulation, you know, you're not, you know, it's a simulation of what you're seeing. It's not the reality of what you're seeing. And that's kind of narco state level stuff. Another one is there was a police officer in the state of Michoacan, in the state police. He had the nickname Tyson. Because he was kind of stocky guy with a thick neck. Used to be like friendly to local journalists, you know. Oh yeah, Tyson. Come on, that's how you doing, yeah, Tyson. He was eventually arrested and came out, and he gave a confession on TV. That's how they made him give confessions on TV. And he described how he was a ranking cartel member who would not only commit murders for the cartel and organize police and give police cars to the cartel and use them. He would also be involved in bloodying the recruits. So they recruit young guys into the cartel. And they want to get, you know, you get a young 16, 17-year-old kid into the cartel. Okay, you know, this guy's got to work for us. He's got to serve. He's got to, you know, be useful. You can't have him at a moment be scared. So you get these young kids to make them cut up bodies, chop up bodies and stuff of victims to get them blooded. Because you got to make them lose their sense, lose their humanity to fight in these wars. And again, I mean, that's a state police commander. So yeah, it's as bad as they say. Now, I would add just a kind of footnote to that. When I say it's that bad, it's almost like, damn, this whole state's got to go. You know, what do we do with that? If the state's that rotten, what do you do with it? Now, I don't quite see that in the weird, you know, Mexican. If you think about the state or conceptually a state, perhaps like a forest of different trees. So you've got, you know, areas like the military or the police, but then also you've got things like the health service. You've got the school teachers. You've got, you know, the electricity. So parts of the state are still functioning okay. and are not, involved in the narco thing, and parts of them are totally corrupt. So if you think about these different trees, and then they've got like this rotten, venomous plant wrapped around certain trees. Now, and it gets to the point around certain trees where it's kind of this plant is really embedded into changing nutrients with these trees, so you can't even really see where the state begins and the crime stops. It's just like one thing, and these cops, cops and criminals are literally the same thing. But is it going to be any good to try and set fire to the whole forest? If you set fire to the whole forest to try and burn it down, is that going to be like about wildfires from California? Okay. Is that going to really make things better? You set fire to the whole forest, then we end up putting it out halfway through, and we still got it. Or we've got to try and how do you try and remove that rot from certain trees, or maybe chop down a couple of trees. So that's one thing. The state. The second thing is you mentioned was the population, the communities, the people. So I would say that's mixed, very mixed. Mexico's a big country of 130 million people. This is not all of the country. It's certain areas where the cartels are very, very strong, certain areas where they're mediumly strong, and certain areas where they're not really an issue. If you look at the areas where they're very strong, then you certainly do have a support base for the cartels, and they deliberately cultivate this. You saw during the early COVID when everything was locked down, and they went to these communities and started handing out goodie bags. I went to one of the places where people were receiving these goodie bags, plastic bags with sugar and eggs, and these people saying, and they gave us. It wasn't only cheap eggs and sugar; it was good quality, proper, brand name sugar. They were giving us. It's not even that many people who really receive it, but they video it, they put it out on the social media. So we're the good guys. We're giving back to our communities. The same thing. You'll get that in there's a Children's Day in Mexico that give out presents to poor kids. So again, you're winning hearts and minds. So you get that, then also you get the narco culture, which is a whole thing of songs. They'll pay musicians to sing songs about them. Part of that because it's a weird culture. These, when you get into it, these are pretty good. These are pretty good songs, pretty good bands. I've talked to some of these guys, and they get paid like $40,000 to write a song about some drug trafficker. They play at their party, sometimes $100,000. It's a crazy world. But so that's a way as well. They kind of really got their things on the culture, and that culture is very popular. And you get some people who are paid or getting money from them who they'll move people on the streets. It's mostly them really moving it who take to the streets suddenly to demonstrate. And really these are cartel organized demonstrations. They'll use the same tactics of in Mexico, the kind of left wing activists of marching, blockading roads, burning trucks. And they'll kind of use it and pretend it's sometimes pretend it's like an anti-military demonstration, but really it's like cartel orchestrated. So they use some of these techniques as well. Now, as well as that, in the community, there's many people who hate these cartels, who have had children who've been killed by them, who've disappeared, who really don't like living. If you can imagine in the community where you grew up and think about the kind of most violent people there, the kind of worst thugs in your community. Everyone's got one. I grew up in a small town in England, but we had a couple of local thugs, kind of hooligans, thugs who would like rob houses and start fights, and people be scared of a couple of guys, but they haven't really got some big status in this big community. Imagine those guys are the guys running the town. Those guys are in charge. It's not all the case, because sometimes, and I've talked to some of these leaders of these cartels, and they're not only thugs, to be fair. Some of them, they're very clever as well, and they're charismatic guys, and they're guys who know how to talk, because to control people, it's kind of a political thing as well. You're how do you control people? But you've got a lot of power to like thugs, down on the streets. If you're in one of these places like Sinaloa, I had a friend there. He had like banged into a car. Or the car kind of banged into him, one of these like incidents. The guy suddenly comes out of the car, it's a complete narco. So he says, I want $5,000 right now. no, give me the money right now. I haven't got it. Let's go to your house. So suddenly he has to go to his house. He's living with his parents, and his guys going in with guns, trying to get him the money. So that's what you have to live with on a daily basis, living around these. There's just thousands of incidents like that you can describe. So many people against them now. You've had, worse practices. That's the kind of lightweight things, the worst stuff, where you had cartels. They vary in how predatory they are. One of the more predatory ones was known as the Knights Templar, kind of bizarre name, taking the name from these Caballeros Templarios, this name of these crusading knights. Now, they began to say, when they rose, this is early 2010s, they really got to their zenith, maybe about 2013. But they would go to everyone, start saying, okay, everyone's got to pay us money. You're making tortillas, you've got to pay us a money, and all of the, if you sell your tortillas for 15 pesos a kilo, you got to pay us 2 pesos. You're having a party, are you? You got to pay us money. So your shakedowns for everything. You're growing limes, cultivating limes, pay us some money. I thought we'll take over the lime cooperative and we'll set the prices of limes, giving us our own pay. And they started saying, oh, right, I see you've got a nice looking daughter. We're going to take her with us for a ride. She'll come back in a few days, pregnant. That's the kind of really abusive. And if you look at this one guy called Dr. Morelis, who's one of the guys who rebelled against them with his own suspect history. But anyway, Dr. Morelis, he described this, he was a doctor, and so he was, all these girls coming in pregnant and they've been raped. That was a point. People don't like, and people are sensitive talking about this because it was not only the issue of rape, the humiliation, but that was the point. These guys like, so we get back to guns. They're like, we're going to take up guns against the cartel. So we're forming our own militia. So they kind of met together in secret, and then they announced up, and then they created this big militia movement known as autodefensas, self-defense squads against the cartels. Led to a big kind of trench warfare that happened over 2014 in Michoacan, still going on really. Now the problem for that, and one of the reasons why, again, I'll be hesitant to saying that's a solution, because I'm sure some people will hear that and go, well, guns a solution. You got to give the good guys guns. The problem why that didn't work out is you ended up with these same self-defense squads becoming the new cartel. Suddenly they're controlling towns, disappearing people, trafficking drugs, doing the same stuff. So it's like, how do you create a police force that can really work, which is really responsive to people? These are tough things. These are tough questions. I mean, I think about guns and self-defense and living here, when you really deal with this stuff, as I go around the country and deal with heavily armed guys, I could carry a gun. It wouldn't be any good for my safety. In fact, it'd be more of a liability. Because when I'm dealing with, sometimes, like a dozen guys with AK-47s, if I have a handgun, it's no good. I don't bring security with me because it's no good bringing some unarmed security. I mean, a lot of these TV companies are like, oh, we've got to send security. It's like, these security guys aren't going to, what are they going to do? They're already more of a liability. You have some ex-military guy, it looks worse. If I have 12 guys with AK-47s, that's protection. And then sometimes I'll go to play. I mean, one time I was going to a place in Michoacan State, and I talked to one of these local guys who's currently in prison in Florida. But he was kind of the local chief. And I said I wanted to look at some of these mines, and he actually gave me about 15 guys. He goes, bring them. Here's 15 guys in a couple of trucks, and they can take you around and show you. I've gone to places with the local police and said, can you help give us some backup? We're going to go to this place. I went to a place. It was where they'd melted the bodies, dissolved the bodies of more than 250 people in metal barrels. A state called Coahuila. Horrific story. I went there with a colleague. We went there. They still had the metal barrels. They still had you could still see like plastic, things of car acid and, different battery acid, different stuff they'd used to make these mixtures. Went there and we asked for backup, and they sent us a whole convoy of these very heavily armed state police. I mean, the same state police are corrupt and stuff, but in that particular case, they're with us, giving us some backup to do this. So the issue again is like, me having a gun is not going to defend myself against this stuff. It's like, how do you really kind of see power, gun power, firepower in a state where you do get a state collapsing or becoming completely corrupt? And how do you see that? And I would argue that in the United States, the reason really that criminals are kept in check in the United States, I'm very open to this discussion. I'm always learning. I could be wrong about a lot of this stuff. But the reason I believe that criminals are kept in check in the United States in a big way is because the United States, it has paradoxes that it has very, very powerful law enforcement historically. It's getting weakened the last couple of years, but historically, the US has hit organized crime, gangs hard. So they haven't grown in power like they have here. And that's really what stops some gangsters with guns, kicking down your door and going taking somebody.
So I think I follow the narco culture pretty in depth. And I think one of the things people always highlight is when the Mexican Marines are coming, that means you're pretty much fucked. Whoever it might be, whether you're a high ranking narco official or if you're a low level Sicario. But I think this brings us back to, I think you're fully correct. I think having the not heavily armed, but closer to militarized police does help mitigate crime. But when we look at the perspective in Mexico, we highlight the Mexican Marines, but there's a lot of questions a lot of times too that, and this brings us back to almost the corruption conversation, is that they are the power player. They are the ones that were like, they're going to shut down the groups. However, when corruption gets involved, there's questions. I know this is pretty popularized. Maybe you could speak to this a little bit, where there was murmurs that the government took Sinaloa's side in their conflict with the Zetas. So doesn't that also kind of create that dynamic there too, where we have to look into how are we going to be able to foolproof, these type of government entities? Because getting the Marines well armed and, ready to take on whatever situation might be in front of them is one thing. Getting them willing to, fully get rid of all the cartels or not side with one, as the example is Sinaloa, is a whole nother.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, absolutely. There was, huge corruption and times where the government or elements, again, the government itself now is a many-headed beast. But you had large elements of federal forces taking the side of the Sinaloa cartel against Zetas, against the Juarez cartel. So then sometimes as well, what you get is you get different elements of the state working with different cartels. In the early days, back in the 2000s, I was covering a shootout between the local city police and the federal police. But the reason is we're having a shootout because they're working with different cartels. So they're fighting, you got it. And so it's literal kind of crazy stuff there. Absolutely. Like there was elements with the Marines, which then helped up back the Jalisco cartel originally at one time. The Zetas kidnapped 6 Marines. They set them up in the state of Veracruz, and they invited them. They were working with local police, and they said, "Come out for a drink in the evening." Local police were working. No, they come out for a drink with these local cops they're working with. Didn't have all their gear with them, the guns. Walk into a bar, Zetas are there. Kidnapped them, tortured them on video, and murdered them. I mean, the Zetas were like beyond the pale. They were like, even with inside the craziness, they were like the beyond the pale crazies. So then the Marines after that were like, "Fuck these guys. We're gonna fucking kill Zetas. We ain't gonna fuck anymore. We got. Imagine having the American Marines. If you had 6 of your guys being kidnapped and murdered, or like, be like, fuck it. We're just gonna kill it. So they start going out, bang, 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 bang. We're gonna kill people wherever. Now, when you start doing that, are you necessarily killing the bad guys? Then you start like grabbing some kid. Is he really part of them? But also, even if he is part of them, I mean, this happens. It's a big incident recently. You find some of these guys, they are bad guys, but then you go in there and like bang, 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 we're killing them as well without they got the guns down. Because what are the rules of engagement in this situation? They're not clear. So then everyone's like, this becomes the story, and it's right. You can't really have the military going around just murdering people. I mean, if it was my kid and the military just kill them, and it's like, but then again, sometimes they're killing bad guys, but they're killing bad guys without when their guns are down. Now, worse than that still. I was in the and this is sensitive stuff, but I was in the port of Manzanillo, biggest port in Mexico, faces China, 3 million containers coming through that a year, run by the Marines right now. Fentanyl's coming through there. Bribes are being paid. So there's a lot of money in drugs.
And we saw a video of Guzman arrested recently too, and I was surprised that he was